Welcome, Campfire Crew. Let's get it on. Terrifying Day by Emily M. I was in my 5th period biology class. The door to my biology classroom was outside on the 2nd story, near a bridge that overlooked the senior patio, which was a large outdoor place for students to eat lunch in. It was lunchtime for half of the school, so we were able to hear the students talking and laughing. It was a gloomy day, cloudy and windy. A thunderstorm was approaching, but it hadn't started raining yet. Suddenly, the talking and laughing from the lunch patio changed. We heard the students screaming, loudly. My teacher looked out the window, and she saw all of the students who were eating outside running into the 2nd gym, which was right next to the lunch patio. Our teacher assumed there must have been a tornado, so she told us to get under our desks and cover our necks. A few seconds later, we heard the intercom turn on, and a voice said, "Code Red," and the intercom hung up. Code Red at my school means lockdown. My teacher had us all hiding in the corner out of view of the windows. She had to crawl on her stomach to lock the door, close the blinds, cover the window on the door, and turn off the lights. It was obvious this was not a drill. Most of us were crying. We were terrified. When the school is under a code red, students aren't allowed to be on cell phones, but some of my students in my class disobeyed that rule, and they Googled what was going on. There was a news alert of there being an active shooter at a high school. Our high school. The school was very quiet. It was eerie. You could hear a pin drop. About 15 minutes after we were put under the lockdown, we heard multiple helicopters flying over the school. All nearby police officers were told to come to the school. The road outside of the school was closed, and parents were lining up around the gate, crying for their children. After what seemed like hours of sitting in the silent classroom, our door was broken down despite it being locked. Men ran in with large guns in their hands, the ones with lasers at the top. It was the SWAT team. My teacher hadn't been wearing her school ID that day, so they pinned her to the ground and searched her. The SWAT team told all of my classmates to put our hands on our heads and to not move. They made us get in a line, with one SWAT member at the front and one at the back. They said something along the lines of, "We're getting you guys out of here," and we all ran in a line through the halls as fast as we could, down the stairs and out the main entrance. When we made it to the parking lot, there were tons of police officers and emergency personnel, and parents were still surrounding the gate. Turns out, there wasn't actually a shooter. A student at the middle school next door prank called 911, saying there was a shooter in the cafeteria of my school. My Haunted Dorm Room by Christina. During my sophomore year, I lived in a haunted dorm. I'll admit it, I've always loved a good ghost story, so you could say I was primed to have a ghost sighting, or at least hopeful for one. And at Kenyon College in Ohio, where I went to school, ghosts are a big part of campus lore. Every October, the security guards host a bonfire and recount, straight-faced, tales of disappearing footprints, disembodied wails, and an elevator that operated on its own. One professor leads a haunted campus tour, and Kenyon alumni from different generations share versions of the stories at reunions and gatherings. It's part of our shared language and a useful conversation starter. The stories themselves are regularly embellished, and some have taken on mythic proportions, but the original tales come from a handful of tragic accidents over the last century. One such took place around 4 a.m. in 1949, when a towering stone dormitory called Old Kenyon burned to the ground in a devastating fire that killed 9 students. 2 of those students died as a result of skull fractures they suffered after jumping from the windows. The fire was national news, It made the front page of the newspapers, along with a photo of a group of college men huddled before the building, its windows illuminated by the uncontrollable blaze. The dorm, a beautiful 1829 Gothic revival building with spires, had been the centerpiece of campus, so the school vowed to rebuild quickly, and by the next year, Old Kenyon was ready for new inhabitants. The exterior was reset with the structure's original stones, but the inside was reconstructed with concrete and steel to be safer and more modern in design. According to legend, the ghosts of the dead students prefer to walk along the old floor plan. Allegedly, they silently traverse the hallways, visible only from the waist up. That, or their feet can be seen gliding over student heads. When I lived in Old Kenyon, I never saw any meandering spirits, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, when not a Kenyonite was stirring, I'd awake to an odd pattern. The room would get very cold, and I would feel the presence of a slow-moving force gliding toward me past my dresser. My makeup cases, vitamin bottles, and other dresser-top trinkets would clatter to the floor, but they wouldn't fall all at once. Instead, the items would drop to the carpet one by one, as if someone were pushing a hand slowly through them. In these moments, I'd lay very still, paralyzed by an oddly cheerful terror. My ghost was back. There were a few other poltergeist-esque encounters during the year. And once, my roommate and I fled screaming after a disembodied voice woke us both up at the same time. A college boyfriend also once dreamed he heard the door slam before he was locked in place by cold hands, pressing him into the bed. I've held these stories up as proof of a genuine haunting. My school was attacked by a gang of stupid teenagers, by Coleman M. This was during 4th grade. It was almost the end of the day, and I was ready to go home, though the school announced a lockdown. To be completely honest, at the time, I wasn't scared, only angry that I had to wait longer to go home. My elementary school wasn't in the best location. It was located fairly deep in a bad part of town. It was surrounded by old suburban homes and many abandoned strip malls. So, my teacher instructs the class to position ourselves in a place where we couldn't see the door. We're all huddled in a corner, all of us whispering in terror, wondering what was going to happen. I didn't have any friends in the class, so I just sat there waiting for all of it to be over. Eventually, we heard rapid footsteps coming up from the hallway. Our teacher demanded all of us to be dead silent. More footsteps followed, then banging at the door. An intruder was trying to unlock it, briskly shaking the door handle. My classmates and I struggled to keep our panic screams inside of us. Everything was totally quiet, but it was followed by more rapid footsteps. My heart was beating 1,000 times a second. I was covered in sweat, and the temperature of the huddle began to rise. I was fighting against tears of fear, even though other students had already given up. The sound of glass shattering came from the hallway, followed by suppressed yells. About 2 hours later, staff at the school began knocking on doors, telling us it was safe to come out. As I walked out the door, I found janitors cleaning up what appeared to be broken glass from earlier. Our teachers guided us to the office where we would be picked up by our parents, and as I walked down, I found broken windows on the classroom doors. When I got to the office, my parents were waiting there, and I was expecting a big hug and thank God you're alive. Instead, my dad just said, "Come on, time to get out of here." For me, it was the last day of school. Me and my family moved. About 3 weeks later, my parents finally decided to tell me what had happened. Apparently, a group of teenagers around 18 decided to steal from the school. The police say they thought the school ended a day earlier. It did, but we had a snow day and we had to make it up. A big thanks to the snow days, huh? There were about 6 of them, and one of them had a parent that used to work at the school, and they got a hold of a key card to let themselves in. Once they got in, they immediately put the school into lockdown, and apparently they can lock the doors from the inside. the group of teenagers, was locked in. So they ran around the school trying to hide. One of the teenagers had a great idea to punch a window of a classroom and unlock it from the inside. 4 of them were found right off the bat. The other 2 were hiding in the ceiling. School bus driver, submitted by Skids. My parents had their second child when I was well into my teenage years. My little sister, the whoops kid. I say that jokingly because my parents love her dearly, and so do I. When she was at first grade, I started taking her to school in the morning because my job was close by the school. It made more sense to do that than to have her waiting around for the bus. I was happy to do it, and I would play music for her and make her laugh before she went into her school. My mom or dad would pick her up at the end of the day because they also had jobs that were allowing them to pick her up and not have her waiting for the bus. Just so everyone's clear, we weren't against the cheese wagon. I rode in it, but it just made a lot of sense for us to take her there and pick her up because, well, honestly, things started to get hairy in our part of town, and we didn't want her to be in any danger. So I kept this up for 2 years, but when she started 3rd grade, my hours changed, and I was also going to community college, so I couldn't take her in the morning anymore. She did have to ride the awful cheese wagon after all. And here's where things went off the rails. One morning, she was waiting for the bus and got picked up as normal. She didn't realize that there was a different driver that day, but because all her friends were on the same bus, she didn't think twice about it. She simply got on, took her seat, and waited to be taken to school. That day, there was a special training about emergency evacuations of the school bus. They did it in the school parking lot, and they showed the kids how to open the emergency exits, the windows, the back door, the front door, the whole 9. Some of the kids were allowed to jump out of the back door, and from what I've been told, everyone was enjoying this fun little diversion that kept them out of class for a few minutes. However, this new bus driver told my little sister to stay back after all the other kids had exited the bus. He told her he needed a special helper to close the windows and close the emergency exit at the back of the bus. As any little kid who was given any amount of authority or responsibility, she eagerly helped out. She was just happy that she was the one picked to take care of the bus that took her to school and brought her home. Unfortunately, this guy got back into the driver's seat and started driving out of the school parking lot with my little sister still on the bus. She made her way up to the front and asked him, as any little kid would, "Where are we going? Why aren't you taking me to school?" He said, "I'm taking you for a special treat because you helped me with the windows and the back door." He drove out of the school parking lot, and my little sister obviously started getting nervous. This was well before the days of cell phones, and she knew something was wrong, but she had no way to call me, my mom, or my dad. The guy continued to drive around our town aimlessly for who knows how long, but I'm pretty sure he was looking for a place to do something to my baby sister. When she didn't show up in her classroom, the school called my dad to let him know that she didn't get off the bus and wanted to know if she was sick or if something else was wrong. Well, the school didn't call my parents. I happened to be home still. I happened to answer the phone, and I knew immediately something was wrong. I called my father, who was kind of hard to reach because he worked in a manufacturing plant on the floor and was not easily accessible. Before he could call me back, I hopped into my car and started looking for my baby sister. I drove her normal route to school and then started going up and down all of the side streets, trying to see if maybe she was walking, or if something happened, or for whatever reason she was no longer on the bus. After about 15 minutes of looking for her, I saw her normal bus drive by me at a 4-way stop. I immediately got behind it, cutting off some people, and I'm sure I pissed them off, but oh well, I was on a mission. I followed her bus for about a quarter of a mile and saw her feet walking up and down the bus aisle. I knew something was wrong. And to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure it was her, but I still saw those little feet through the little window of the back of the emergency door. The bus eventually drove into a parking lot and stopped. I followed it in and stopped my car, and to this day I am 100% sure the bus driver had no idea I was behind him, which was to my advantage, as you will see. I didn't know what happened right away, and after the incident, my baby sister would tell us what had happened, and she told my parents and the school and the police as well. The bus driver stopped the bus, got out of his seat, and walked down the aisle and grabbed her. He tried to take her clothes off, but was fumbling with her while she was screaming because she had a backpack on. Holy cow, I remember it was a Ms. Pac-Man backpack. I had gotten out of my car and only heard her terrified cries. The dumbass driver had left the door slightly ajar, which allowed me to push it open when I kicked it and get into the bus. I got on, ran up the steps, down the aisle, and flew at the guy, got him in a stranglehold, and yanked him off my baby sister and threw him into one of the seats. My poor baby sister was crying her eyes out, and while I was wailing on this fat piece of shit, I was telling her it was going to be okay and that I was here for her. In hindsight, I should have just taken care of her, but I was so pissed off that this piece of shit was going to do something to my baby sister. It felt like 2 hours, but it was probably 30 seconds before the police pulled up, jumped on the bus, and pulled me off the guy. They hauled me out of the bus. A female police officer got my baby sister, and a couple of other officers stayed on the bus with that piece of shit. Not much longer later, my dad pulled up and started asking questions about what was going on. Long story short, they let my dad take my baby sister home, let me go, but when they took that piece of shit off the bus, he looked worse than when I left him there. I'm pretty sure the cops had a fun time knocking him around. Hey, I'll say this. I'm not a huge fan of cops, but that day I was thrilled that they decided to have a little bit of justice on that fat piece of shit. The last we heard, that guy spent 2 years in jail, and that's all we know. I hope to God he is not driving a bus or in a job that has anything to do with kids. To be honest, if he was, I would not hesitate to follow him again, track him down, and beat the shit out of him all over again. Insane College Roommate, submitted by Jackie. Here's the obligatory, my real name isn't Jackie, but it is for this story. When I went to college in 1996, I was assigned a roommate that I did not meet at orientation. They did give us each other's phone numbers, and we talked over the summer about who had what worked out for the room, but that was all about the interaction I had with her. I'll call her Jenny. I had a microwave, she had a TV, and we figured we'd be pretty well set, and we were excited to meet each other and start our freshman year. Everything was fine for the first few weeks, but then I started to notice the strange habits she had. She would ask to borrow clothes, which normally I wouldn't care about. By this time, we knew each other a little bit, but I started to notice that she was borrowing things that she should not have been borrowing, like my bra and panties. I mean, a sweater is one thing, but your underwear is really creepy. Not wanting to create a whole thing out of it, I just told her that I wasn't cool with her doing that, and if she would please stop. I didn't care if she raided my closet for anything else. She apologized, and we moved on. Not long after that, though, I was up late studying at my desk with my desk light on and my headphones on, doing my best to not disturb her as she had gone to bed earlier. When I got up to get a water out of our mini fridge, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, just staring at me. I had no idea how long she had been doing that, but it was freaking me out, and I asked her if she was okay. She said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I asked her, "Can't you sleep?" And she said, "No, I was just looking around the room." What the fuck? I didn't say anything else and said, "Well, I'm going to go to sleep now." I went and brushed my teeth and then got into bed. The next night was Friday night, and a bunch of the other girls on our floor of the dorm we were living in were going to a house party. You know, the red Solo cup for $3 and all the bad beer you can drink. I wasn't dating anyone and had no interest at that point in time, so I wasn't really showing myself off to any of the guys there, but was still mingling and chatting with everyone. Jenny most certainly was looking for a guy, and she ended up hooking up with one of the guys who was an upperclassman that lived in the house hosting the party. I left the party with my floor mates and went home to crash as I was more than a little tipsy. But about 5 in the morning, my dorm room door opened, and Jenny came stumbling in with a huge smile on her face, and not wearing any shoes. It was so early, I didn't say anything, but she came right over to me and said that she had had a great night, and held up a baggie. I kind of mumbled to her, "What the heck is that?" And she just gave me that huge smile and said, "I blew Tony," and held up the bag. She had spit his stuff into the baggie and brought it home with her. I was beyond horrified and simply said, "Oh," and rolled over and went back to sleep. She passed out on her bed. I couldn't really sleep, so I got up to go for a run to cleanse the beer I had put down at the party. I did a loop around campus, showered, and then met my friends in the hallway to go to breakfast. I thought about telling them all the weird stuff Jenny was doing, but didn't. Maybe she had some mental problems or something. We all decided to go watch a soccer game that afternoon after lunch, and we went back to my friend Melissa's room to watch The Real World and just hang out. About an hour later, there was a banging on the door, and Mel opened it to a disheveled Jenny who yelled, "Why didn't you wake me up for breakfast?" The rest of us just stood there in shock. Another girl, Kat, said, "Jenny, your feet are bleeding." I looked down and saw that, yeah, her feet were bloody, and was about to say I'd take her to the campus infirmary when she just screamed, "They were bleeding! It's stopped now!" Then she just left and went back to her room. It was then that I decided to tell my friends what was going on and all the strange things she was doing. They told me to stay with them if I wanted to or needed to, and if anything else happened or I felt threatened, I should go to our RA. I didn't go back to my room for a while. We just went to the game and then went to dinner together. When I did go back to my room, Jenny was not there, but the windows were open, and it was mid-October in Rhode Island, so you can imagine it was just a little chilly. I shut the windows, sat down to do some homework before I went to a movie the campus was showing. I got back to our room around 11:30, and there was a note on our whiteboard that just said, "Dearest Jackie, please keep the windows open just a bit. Love you, Jenny." At first I didn't think anything of it and went inside, but after a few minutes I cringed. "Love you? Okay." I grabbed my comforter and pillow and went down the hall to Melissa's and asked if I could crash there that night. She and her roommate Chris said sure, and Chris brought out a bottle of Rumpelmans, and we all had a couple of drinks just talking and watching TV. We fell asleep, but at around 3 in the morning there was a thumping on the door. Not a pounding, just a constant thumping. It kept going for more than 5 minutes, but when we snuck over to the door and looked out the peephole, there was no one there. We could see a shape under the crack of the door, but agreed we were not opening it. The phone rang, and it was the girl from across the hall. She said Jenny was sitting against the door, banging the back of her head against it. Mel hung up and called the desk downstairs and asked what RA was on duty and to come up there. She had heard and seen enough of Jenny. The RA on duty came up, and then the shrill laughter of Jenny. There was another voice, and then a scuffle broke out. We heard Erica the RA say, "Call campus police," and the scuffle kept up, with Jenny yelling out gibberish. After a few minutes, campus police showed up, and with another struggle, they took her away. Erica knocked on the door, and she came in. We told her all the crazy things that Jenny had been doing. She told me to file an official report, and I asked if I could switch roommates. She said she'd look into it, and then spotted the Rumpelmans. We were a dry dorm. Ladies, lose it or do a better job of hiding it. That's all she said and left. It was a funny line we all needed. The next morning, I went to get my running stuff from my room, and again, the windows were wide open. There were bloody footprints on the floor that I made sure to walk around, and then I saw these baggies tacked onto Jenny's corkboard above her desk. There were 5 in all, with what I later found out to be semen, with letters written on them in Sharpie. It took me a minute, but each of the letters corresponded with the first names of the guys who were living in the house that had the party on Friday night. I gagged a little and immediately called the RA again. She came up, took one look at the floor, and called the RD. They both told me to get anything I needed out of the room, and Melissa came down to help me get my books and shower stuff and some clothes. I still went for a run, and when I got back, the RD was still at my room, but now with campus police and the local authorities. The RD was this wonderful woman named Karen who always called everyone honey, and she pulled me aside and said, "Honey, did you make a report about what Erica told me?" I said not yet, and she said, "Well, get showered up, honey, and then come down to my office." I did, and there I filled out a report and then answered questions from the police about Jenny. I asked about getting another roommate, and they said that that wasn't going to be an issue. Jenny wasn't coming back to campus for a while, if ever, but they wouldn't tell me why. When I called my parents and told them, they said to get permission to come home for a couple of days, and I did with my profs on Monday. My RD had also made some calls to them explaining the situation. My parents picked me up, and I went home for a bit. When I got back to campus on that Thursday, the RD met me and my parents and told me that my room had been completely emptied, professionally cleaned and sanitized, and that I would have a single for the rest of the year. Jenny was gone. Jenny had been taking a boatload of acid and ecstasy and was pretty far gone almost all of the time. When they got her outside of Melissa's door, she had an entire blotter of acid on her, and she had also been selling it. I never heard from her again, and all I have are these stories. Sometimes I wonder where she is and if she's okay now. Who knows? Scary School, submitted by Dopey Dick. When I was in high school, I was on the rifle team, and we practiced at our range in the basement of our school. I think the school was built in the 50s or something like that, but by the 2000s it seemed really old, but not as old as some of the other school buildings in my town. Having said that, a basement is a basement is a basement. The team wasn't super popular, and there were only about 6 of us on it. And looking back, it seems like there were only about 6 to 10 people on the teams we competed against. I guess rifle just wasn't popular in my neck of the woods. But we didn't care, and we had a blast, no pun intended. One day, we were wrapping up practice, and me and my 2 friends, I'll call them Tom and Pete for this, as to not embarrass them if they hear it, we were hanging around still wanting to practice. The other guys had taken off for the late bus, and my coach was preparing to leave too. I asked him if we could stay and practice a little longer. I reminded him how safe we were and gave him all the excuses a kid comes up with when they want to do something outside the box. At first he said, "Guys, we're done for the day. We've got more practice tomorrow. Go on home." But Tom and Pete jumped in, and he stood there looking at us for a few minutes while we pled our case. And then he did what I know now as an adult was a terribly negligent thing to do. He let us stay to shoot for another hour, but told us we really had to clear out of there by 6:15. Now, before I go any further, I want to just say that most of the stories of a ghostly nature that I've heard always seem to happen at night. As I just said what time it was certainly not the case with what we were about to experience. Excited to shoot some more, we got our gear ready while our coach left and decided to have our own 3-man competition. After the first round, Tom looked at me and said, "Hey, Rich, did you see that over there?" And he pointed his finger towards the far end of the basement. I said, "No, what are you talking about?" And he said, "I swear to God, I saw a guy standing over there just a second ago." He then went on to say that it wasn't one of those out of the corner of his eye things. He was looking straight over there and saw a guy. When he turned his back to us to ask us if we had seen anything, the guy had disappeared. Pete and I told him he was crazy. There was nobody else down there. And even if there was, it was probably just a custodian wondering why there was shooting going on past 5:15. But in the back of my mind, I also thought, if it was someone from the school, they certainly would have come over to ask us why we were still there. We didn't make a big deal out of it, but it was kind of spooky. We got ready for our next round and got to it. When we finished, I think all three of us on instinct looked over to the far corner, and we couldn't believe our eyes. There was a guy standing there looking at us, wearing what I can only call a madman suit. It was a boxy suit with one of those skinny ties, and I think what stood out to us was it was brown. In the 2000s, not many of the adults or teachers in our lives wore brown suits. And he was also wearing horn-rimmed glasses, which was not a fad at the time. As we all turned to look at each other and say, "Holy shit," we looked back, and the guy was gone. "I think we should all get the heck out of here," said Tom. I said nothing, and Pete said, "Screw that. Let's shoot one last round and see if he comes back. Then we'll go over and see if we can talk to him." I don't think I need to point out that Pete was into all that ghost hunter stuff on TV. So we all kind of agreed, knowing that we were safe as the stairs were to the other side of the basement, and if need be, we could be out of there if we hauled ass. So we got back into position for one more round, and I have to admit I was shooting poorly because I was intrigued with that back corner of the basement and kept glancing over there. It was screwing up my breathing. It was screwing up my concentration. But I reminded myself it was just practice and who cared anyway. We finished up, and all of us immediately looked over to the corner. And there was the guy. All of us, rifles still in hand, immediately started walking quickly over to the man who did not disappear this time, and stood there just staring at us with a mean look on his face. The closer we got, the more we noticed how angry he really looked. When we got closer to him, Pete yelled out, "Hey, do you like how we shoot?" I looked at Tom like, what the hell is he doing? As God is my witness, the man, still glaring at us, raised his hand, pointed at us and said, "Practice is over. You don't belong here. Go home." We all stopped dead in our tracks and watched him turn around and walk through a closet door. I said, "F this, let's go," but Pete ran to the closet and ripped it open. There was nothing in there but cleaning supplies, a mop bucket, and some brooms. The guy was nowhere to be seen. We had no idea what to do, and decided to actually haul ass out of there. We didn't tell anyone and talked about it all the way home in Tom's car. He dropped me off after he dropped off Pete and said, "Are we crazy? I mean, we saw and heard that guy tell us to get out of there. There's no way that didn't happen." I agreed and said, "Yeah, that happened." And I said, I think we got to make sure not to tell anybody, but we probably should talk to Coach about this." The next day at practice, we were too excited to wait until it was over to bring it up with the coach. He looked at us, then pulled us aside while the other guys kept going with practice. "What did he look like?" he asked. And we realized he was dead serious, and he wasn't telling us immediately that we were chasing phantoms or that we hadn't seen anything that really wasn't there. Pete gave a pretty good description, and Tom and I agreed, and he kind of shook his head with a little smile. He then told the other guys to keep at it, and told us to store our rifles and to follow him. We did, and he took us to our main hallway of the school where there was all the awards and pictures of alumni and that sort of stuff. One of the pictures up there was of the first principal of the building. I'll say that his name was Mr. Smith, and holy cow, that was the guy when we saw his picture. Coach said that he ruled the building with an iron fist, and while he was a good educator, every kid was terrified of him, or at least terrified to get into trouble. He said all the kids even called him Old Ironsides, and that we were not the first people to say that they had seen him somewhere in the school after hours. We couldn't believe it. Had the guy known we weren't supposed to be there and showed up from the afterlife to tell us to knock it off, still thinking that he was in charge of the school? I have no idea, but we know what we saw. Coach agreed that we probably did see him, and we never practiced after 5:15 again. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Make sure you hit the notification button. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, go to my website, truescarystories.net. There's lots of ways that you can help me keep this channel ad-free. Special shout out to my latest patron, Marilyn H. Thanks for your support. And I'd also like to say hi to Tommy, Ben, Anna, and Joe, faithful listeners. Hope you're enjoying the latest episode. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.